Okay, so today we're joined by SciComm Bites author Sam Ridgeway, who recently wrote a piece on SciComm Bites titled "You Say Science Festival, I Say Science Festivaaal," which is a digest response to a Journal of Science Communication research article titled "Science Festival May Not Mean What We Think It Means: An Analysis of How Researchers and Practitioners Use This Term," which was published in 2021. So Sam, I want to just start high level here. Tell us first, what is SciComm Bites about, high level?
Yeah, so SciComm Bites is an online blog, essentially, and it takes bites or short summaries of longer academic science papers, and tries to write them in both a condensed and hopefully more accessible way, so that both fellow researchers or science communication practitioners can delve into it without necessarily having to go through all the journals themselves.
So are you suggesting that people skip the paper in itself?
No. If anything, it's a great. We've already identified certain things that we think might be of interest, and I think hopefully it either leads you to read the full paper, or if you're looking on your commute in the morning, it's enough just to get the thoughts going.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So now let's get right into it. What drew you to this paper? Because in this piece, it sounds like you are passionate about Science Festival. Tell us more.
Yeah, so I've been really fortunate to both attend quite a few science festivals, but also be an intern and also a freelancer during certain science festivals. So as you'll see in the piece, I've written about the Great Exhibition Road Festival, which is hosted in London, which is where I'm currently living. And the Great Exhibition Road Festival is hosted by all these different partners and is arguably like a premier science festival that takes over the street for a full weekend. And seeing that level is both impressive, but you also recognize that there's a lot of maybe smaller events, but equally impactful events that either do not get the same coverage or mean something very different to the community where they're based. And then for myself, I've helped at Malta Science Festival called Science in the City, and I was in intern there. And again, that had this extra layer of, it had a virtual festival alongside the physical festival. And it takes over the whole city of Valletta and various stages and things. And seeing how even that festival year to year has had to change and adapt, whether it was COVID, whether it was adverse weather conditions, and knowing that therefore festivals are very different within themselves. And I just thought that was really interesting. And Ramsey and Boyette, who are the authors of the paper, do a great job at evaluating and surveying numerous of these festivals and really pick apart what makes them different, and then why we need to think about those differences.
Yeah, and I think one of the take-home points was that there's such a wide diversity.
Yes.
Right? As your title says, when you say Science Festival, I say Science Festivaaal, right? So tell us about this diversity. To you, at least, is that strength, or is that causing more problems?
No. I think on the ground it's strength. I think very much you need. We always talk about audiences in science communication. A lot, always. It's always the audience. And I think that knowing that there's a diversity of audience and many different communities you need to reach, that you need different formats for that to happen. I think the issue is that Ramsey and Boyette highlight is that within the research, using this one term of Science Festival makes it very difficult for those case studies to maybe be implemented in the way in the best way moving forward. So something, if you do a festival and it has 50,000 people in attendance, not only obviously will the budget be very different for that, but also the range of formats needed to provide for that audience will be different. Whereas a different format, for example, Pint of Science, which happens nationally, at least in the UK, and is hosted in these sort of pub and cafe settings, you can't evaluate it necessarily within the same sentence or the same style of paper as that larger festival. And so I think it's about how do you make sure that when you're reviewing and telling others about how you're implementing things, that they can actually take away those lessons for themselves and best implement it.
Yeah, and so context matters here.
Context matters, definitely.
Quite a bit. So with that said, who do you think this paper is for? When Ramsey and Boyette wrote this paper, and also on that same wavelength, who do you hope reads your SciComm Bites?
Yeah, that's true. It's so I think in terms of Ramsey and Boyette's paper, I think it first of all probably speaks to other researchers. You know, they're talking to their own community in that regard, saying that this is an issue that they've seen happen. That you hear a lot from people who research science communication. The reason why they're so passionate about researching it is so that it can teach or give lessons to those out on the ground doing science communication. And there's been a little bit of a divide, arguably, between SciComm practitioners and SciComm researchers and how you get that communication going. And I think on one part, that's what SciComm Bites is trying to do, is cater to both audiences at the same time, being able for the academic science communication community to have some summaries that are written for them, as a lot of good research needs to in its communication, but also for those practitioners who maybe their first port of call won't be the journals, that they actually have a blog that they can surface. I think for me personally, it's been interesting writing for them, writing for SciComm Bites, because it still holds an academic tradition to it. It's not a personal blog by one science communicator and their reflections. It's first and foremost centered on the research, and numerous authors who are all very talented and help each other editing. And so it's interesting that it's still rooted in that and trying to maybe provide that bridge from research to practicality.
Even JCOM themselves are trying to do this, right? To bridge the gap between researchers and practitioners. From your sense, do you think that bridge is how strong is that bridge? Is it strengthening, or are we in the same place where we were 10
so
years
where I get myself in trouble? No,
perhaps.
No, I think there are bridges. There are definitely bridges, and I think that both communities are very aware of each other, and in many aspects, a lot of people who are doing the research are also practitioners themselves, and people who are doing the practical work are always evaluating their work as well. So I think the difficulty or the challenge becomes in the academic or the academia of it. So if I were to do a science communication activity myself and I do an evaluation, maybe I put it on a personal website, or maybe it only goes to the client. Whereas if you're in an academic setting, your drive is to get published within a paper, or that's your distribution method. So I think that's the challenge, is maybe in the distribution between the two. And I think the second area where we can see some elements of those bridges, but definitely where it could strengthen, is that you have practical science communicators who are already going out and doing activities and trying to allow academic science communication researchers or evaluators to come in and already monitor those activities. I think a lot of what you see, partly because of the controls required and the constraints you need, you find a lot of researchers who will set up their own event to then evaluate that event, whereas potentially it just involves a bit more collaboration, because a lot of the times that practitioner has done a lot of relationship building, community building, logistics that could all be factored in. So I think both sides are trying, and it's just figuring out where those both distribution and collaboration can be.
Yeah, and in fact, even in this paper, right, they looked at how researchers are using Science Festival in papers, and then on the websites, right, the Science Festival themselves, how they're showcasing that, which I thought, I mean, that's a way to bring the two, right? To showcase like, hey, actually, if there was
Definitely.
more engagement, did you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I think it's one of those that is particularly interesting because it's also that borderline of communication and marketing. And I thought it's interesting as they said, the pieces that the research wants to take out in terms of the number of people, the sort of tabletop activities, versus how you phrase that within marketing of interactivity or family friendly, and try and self-select that audience within. So I think, yeah, I love that they approach the marketing side, because in many ways that's how it is talked about in the real world situation. And so, yeah, it's interesting to see those two sort of parallel lines and where we can make the crosses.
Yeah, and I'm curious though. So, of course, they're not the only ones to have done this. Actually, tell me if you think they were the first ones to look at the science festival and how it's being used, because there's a nice graph look at kind of years, and there's this sort of massive growth that is there. And in your paper, you say, in order to address concerns with evidence-based solutions and to improve on positive engagement aspects of festivals, we must understand the different structures of festivals, right? So give us kind of a bigger landscape here. Is Ramsey and Boyette, are they early stage, or are we talking about that they're adding to this,
Yeah, I think
growth?
yeah, I think it's overall it's additive. I think definitely. I think as they said that, so the graph that you see is a rapid trend. It's even that's interesting in just terms of how science communication, the awareness of SciComm in general has risen into both an academic field and an industry, beyond what it was before. But I think, yeah, in terms of that, what must be done, I think it was coming from as we mentioned earlier, the context is important, and I think we can struggle sometimes. Obviously, we want to reduce jargon and other things, but yeah, it's I mean, it's the point of the paper, I guess. The phrase itself means very different things to different people,
right?
And I think also part of it is not to have one definition dominate over the others, because it is recognition of other people's work, and how, what happens particularly in a UK or an American context may be very different to what happens in a European or African or East Asian context, or anywhere you are in the world. And I think no one can own what it means to be a festival, but it's still important then within those case studies, not only for those people trying to implement the lessons, but for those other researchers who, this is one set of surveys, and it's a fantastic set of, I think it's over 50 festivals. But then if I take a data set now from Europe, though, when I compare to Canada or elsewhere, I need to know that what I'm comparing is similar, so that the points that I'm making, the points of difference that I'm making, actually have relevance, and it's not just a context issue.
Yeah. So finding that, if you're building a science festival in Nigeria, maybe there's some things you don't want to reinvent, right? If we can then know a vocabulary, if we have a vocabulary of some kind, not to say we all should speak the same language, but have elements to know, okay, when I say this is what I mean, perhaps, right? This is what you're referring to, which I think is really cool. I'm curious, maybe there's some databases that do exist mapping these festivals, right? But maybe one, not just a directory, but a dashboard of some kind. Because there's a graph here, figure 2, I believe, right? It's a frequency and festival duration, right?
It'd
be cool if you can click on them, and then different festivals that have different lengths show up, right? Have you thought about this? As this question?
That would be really good. I think I've seen the closest they have is there's certain maps with like science communication masters courses, but I think definitely for festivals, I think probably the closest we have at the moment is which festivals are hiring, as people search for jobs in the industry. But I think it would be, that would be amazing. I think you could tie it definitely in with science centers, I've been a fan
Right.
recently of every time I go on holiday, if there's a science center in the city, it's often really interesting to see in a different national context how their science is presented or how their science stories are told. Yeah, a database would be amazing. And I think, again, that's where you could have an interesting thing with the context of, if I put in, I'm looking at festivals that are 5,000 to 10,000 people, and it, shortens or makes my Venn diagram smaller and things,
Right.
that you could then target which festivals you maybe should be looking at to either compare with or to learn from. Yeah, that'd be really
Yeah.
cool.
And in fact, it's multifunctional because you have the people who are maybe want to attend, maybe the
Yeah,
public in this case,
exactly.
right? And then the
Yeah,
researchers themselves and the practitioners. I mean, everybody wins.
yeah, that would be
um,
amazing. Yeah.
there's one audience we have not talked about here,
Hmm.
and that is the public. I'm assuming if we ask them what does science festival mean, we're probably equally going to get some really
Yeah.
diverse answers here. What do you? Any thoughts there?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think it probably comes first from their own personal context, right?
right.
If I live in London and I get to go to the Great Exhibition Road Festival, I think a festival has a live band and an ice cream truck, as well as many tabletop activities and lectures. But if I'm, if I'm from a smaller town, it can mean something very different. I think it is. I think the important thing with that is, sorry, I look at the camera. I think the important thing with that is the setting of the context. Sorry, or not the context, but the expectation, setting the expectation for the audience. In that, if you only see big events and big festivals every time you hear the word festival, you're thinking it's a large event and it's got a money pumped into it and other things going on. And in comparison, you might hear science cafe is a term, reading groups or single presenters talking about their research, and that gives a different sense of scale. But again, depending on the place, I think that's different. And I think for the public, again, festival sounds a lot more community given. I think when we hear music festival, we think groups and we think maybe different events all within one. And so I think there's a strength in the festival term, but also depending on which communities we're facing, I think there can be a real strength in telling the public exactly what you want the public that or public audience that you're dealing with, exactly what you're going to give them.
Yeah. And man, I think there's no better place to end this.
Yeah.
Or actually, I should say, start this, because this is an ongoing conversation. And as we wrap up here, 30 seconds, Sam,
Cool.
what are you working on right now in terms of pieces? Are you able to, if you're able to share any tidbits, are you following up on this, or have you jumped onto a different track completely?
No, so my day-to-day, I work in television, actually, doing science and nature documentaries. But in terms of being a geek for science communication, the thing I'm really keen on in my next set of writing is to look at how you can offer the broad context of science communication so that the conversations can then move into more complex case studies. I think it's, at the moment, we have incredible individual science communicators who are sharing their individual stories and trying to collect those all in one, like The Brilliant do. It's a great website of case studies, but trying to do more of that and make it more of a community.
Sam, we need to have you back. Okay.
Thank you very much. It's very kind.
This was fun. Thank you so much.
Cheers. Thank you very much.